she's someone that I plan on getting married again.
She walked into Paris like a flame carved from porcelain, dazzling under the electric shimmer of Fashion Week, yet carrying eyes that trembled with a sadness the cameras could not blur. Nicole Kidman has worn glory for decades, but that night, something broke through the glitter. A quiet ache, a shadow, a question no spotlight could chase away. For months, Hollywood whispered about her divorce, about Keith Urban's spiraling exhaustion, about the two daughters who clung to her like the last warm corner of a collapsing home. And now, the world murmurs again. A possible reunion for Christmas. Not for love, not for redemption, but for the fragile hope of giving her children one day of normalcy in a life built on storms. Yet as these whispers rise, another figure returns from the edges of her story. Tom Cruise, the man who once shaped her youth, her fame, her wounds. Tabloids claim he has broken a 20-year silence, calling her heartbreak karma. But the truth is colder, quieter, more haunting. Tom says nothing. He watches nothing. He reveals nothing. Silence has become his final fortress. 3 lives, once intertwined, now drift like distant constellations. One woman carrying the weight of 2 pasts, 2 men standing as echoes in her present, and a single question, sharp as winter air, hangs over all of them. When the world celebrates her glow, who notices the shiver beneath it? She was born far from the red carpets that would one day know her silhouette. Honolulu, 1967, a place of sunlight and warm tides. Yet even in paradise, her childhood carried a quiet heaviness, as if fate had slipped a thin layer of storm beneath the blue sky that greeted her first breath. When Nicole Kidman was 4, her family returned to Australia, and it was there, in the suburbs of Sydney, that the girl who would enchant the world began learning her earliest lessons about fragility. She grew faster than the other children, taller, more awkward. Her height came before her confidence, and the schoolyard can be merciless to a child who does not know where to place her limbs or her dreams. She was shy, painfully so, speaking softly, walking lightly, as though afraid the earth might crack if she demanded too much space. She hid behind her red curls, behind books, behind the quiet corners of the playground. And when the world grew too sharp, she disappeared into the one refuge that never judged her, imagination. Her parents were gentle, thoughtful people. Her father, a psychologist and biochemist. Her mother, a nurse, dedicated to helping others. They didn't raise Nicole to chase fame. They raised her to feel deeply, to see the world not for what it gives, but for what it asks of your heart. That emotional sensitivity, the very thing that made her fragile as a child, would one day turn her into a force on screen. But at the time, it only made her different. And different can be lonely. As a teenager, she discovered theater the way a starving person discovers bread. She found a small drama class, a dim room with peeling paint and mismatched chairs, and in that place she finally breathed. Acting gave her language for the emotions she never learned to voice: rage, longing, fear, hope. It gave her a mask behind which she could finally show her true face. She wasn't running from the world anymore, she was learning how to stand in it. Money was tight. Her mother battled breast cancer. Nicole worked small jobs, sometimes dropping her studies to help at home. These were years that carved her quietly, shaping the compassion that would define her adulthood. She learned early that even the strongest families can tremble, even the bravest hearts can fracture, and even the brightest futures can grow from soil watered by hardship. Yet through all of it, one truth glowed within her like a hidden ember. She would not stay small. She would rise. But no one, not even the girl rehearsing lines under the trembling light of a cheap desk lamp could imagine how far that rise would go, or how devastating the fall would one day be. She stepped into adulthood carrying nothing but raw talent, an aching shyness, and a determination that seemed almost out of place in someone so gentle. While her classmates drifted into predictable futures, Nicole Kidman chose a path lit only by hope and a handful of fragile opportunities. The Australian film industry was small, unpredictable, and brutally competitive. Yet she kept walking toward it, as if drawn by a compass only she could feel. Her first breakthrough came not with applause, but with exhaustion, dead calm. A tense, haunting thriller shot under relentless conditions. Nicole was barely 20, still figuring out who she was, still trembling each time a director called her name. But something happened during that film, something no acting coach could teach. She found the part of herself that did not quake, the part that could take fear, stretch it across her bones, and turn it into art. Hollywood noticed. And Hollywood did not simply notice, it opened a door. Days of Thunder, a film that would change everything. She crossed that threshold with the innocence of someone who didn't yet understand what entering Tom Cruise's orbit meant. He was the golden boy of American cinema, unstoppable, adored, powerful in ways she had never witnessed. Their connection was undeniable, immediate, and electric. And with that connection came a sudden elevation she had never asked for, but could not avoid. She wasn't just Nicole Kidman anymore. She was Nicole Kidman, the woman at Tom Cruise's side. Yet she didn't let that overshadow her own fire. She fought for roles that challenged her. To Die For transformed her into a revelation. The others displayed her mastery of internal storms. Moulin Rouge shattered expectations entirely, proving she could carry not just a film, but a world built from music, heartbreak, and wild imagination. Each role was a step upward, sometimes trembling, sometimes triumphant, but always forward. Every success pushed her further from the shy girl hiding behind her curls and closer to the woman the world would one day call a legend. But with each rise comes a shadow, with each triumph a quiet warning. The higher she climbed, the more fragile the ground beneath her became. And even as the world celebrated her ascent, fate was already setting the stage for the moment she would be forced to fall. By the time the new millennium opened its gates, Nicole Kidman was no longer the shy Australian girl searching for a voice. She had become the voice, unmistakable, magnetic, and impossible to ignore. Hollywood didn't simply admire her, it revolved around her. Directors sought her for roles that demanded depth. Fashion houses wanted her grace. Award shows waited for her presence the way night waits for its first star. She was elegance molded into a human form, a silhouette that could command a room with stillness alone. Then came The Hours, the film that didn't just crown her but redefined her. With a single performance, she crossed from celebrated actress to immortal icon. The Academy Award wasn't just recognition, it was confirmation that Nicole Kidman had transcended fame itself. She was art. She was cinema. She was the quiet storm no one saw coming. From that moment, everything expanded. The offers, the prestige, the expectations. She stepped into roles that required her whole soul. Cold Mountain, Birth, The Golden Compass, Rabbit Hole, Big Little Lies. Each project layered her legacy with something heavier than success: truth. Hollywood adored her, the world worshipped her, and yet in the midst of all that reverence, there was an invisible weight she carried like a secret stone pressed to her ribs. Because fame, for Nicole, was never a sanctuary, It was a battlefield, silent, glittering, and treacherous. Between premieres and trophies, she battled memories she could never fully bury. The collapse of her marriage to Tom Cruise remained an unspoken ghost trailing behind every camera flash. The distance between her and the two children she once called her own lingered like a wound that would not scar. And though she found new love with Keith Urban, the world never stopped comparing, never stopped asking which version of her story was the real one. Still, she stood tall. She mastered the art of moving through scrutiny with a grace that bordered on unreal. She became the woman audiences looked at and whispered, "How does she stay so composed?" They mistook composure for peace. They thought fame had healed her. But fame does not heal. It only magnifies what you hide. While Nicole rose higher, the cracks beneath her life grew wider. Keith Urban's demons shadowed their home. His career, a relentless machine of cities and stages, pulled him away even when his heart stayed tethered to her. And she, juggling motherhood, ambition, and the fragile hope of stability, felt the pressure of being the center of a world that only applauds strength. On red carpets, she shimmered. In magazine covers, she glowed. In interviews, she smiled with practiced gentleness. But behind every perfect image was a woman fighting to hold her life together with hands that had already been burned once. Hollywood crowned her, yes, but crowns are heavy, and even the brightest jewels can cut into the skin. As the world celebrated Nicole Kidman at the height of her fame, none of them knew that the storm brewing in her private life was preparing to strike again, harder than before, deeper than before, in ways even she could not foresee. The first fracture came long before anyone saw it. Years after the applause of the hours faded and Hollywood crowned her its porcelain queen, the past returned like a shadow she could never outrun. Her years with Tom Cruise had been a whirlwind of power, intensity, and silent wounds, an empire built on devotion and pressure, mystery and control. To the world, they were invincible. Inside, they were unraveling one thread at a time. Scientology carved an invisible wall between them. The children they adopted, once the heartbeat of her world, slipped through her fingers, pulled into a belief system she could never follow. She lost more than a marriage, she lost a family. And the silence that followed was not just Tom's silence, it was the silence of two children choosing distance over the woman who had raised them. Of all the grief she carried, this was the one that never truly left her bones. But Nicole kept breathing, she kept rising, and then she fell again. Keith Urban entered her life as a promise of light after a long night. He was tenderness mixed with fire, a man who understood brokenness because he had lived inside it. In him she found something she had forgotten, a place to rest. Together they built a house of hope, of music, of two young daughters who saw their mother not as a star, but as home. But darkness rarely leaves those it has once claimed. Keith's battles with addiction were not loud, but they were relentless. Rehab, recovery, relapse scares. Touring schedules that tore him across continents, leaving Nicole alone with children, gripping her hand at airports. She forgave him again and again because she knew what it meant to love someone who was drowning. But forgiveness, even when infinite, cannot stitch a widening tear. Slowly, painfully, they drifted into separate worlds, his filled with stadium lights, hers with attempts to hold a family together with the fragile glue of hope. Night after night, Nicole waited for the sound of his return, only to hear silence or headlines instead. And then came the final breaking. The divorce papers did not scream, they whispered. A private fracture revealed publicly only when the world was ready to feast on it. Nicole Kidman, the woman who had endured the collapse of one marriage, was forced to endure the collapse of another, this time with two little girls caught in the middle. She appeared at Paris Fashion Week days after the announcement, jaw set, posture immaculate, gown glittering like armor. But her eyes betrayed her. Fans saw something the cameras tried to hide, a hollow softness, a shiver beneath the surface. It was the same look she carried the year she left Tom Cruise, the look of a woman who refuses to break even as the world she built collapses at her feet. Meanwhile, the tabloids erupted. Rumors claimed Keith had already moved on. Others whispered about secret fights, hidden resentments, years of emotional distance. And then came the cruelest headline: Tom Cruise calling the divorce karma. It spread like wildfire. The internet devoured it. The story was too dramatic to resist. Two failed marriages, two men from her past, a Hollywood triangle 20 years in the making. But the truth was far quieter. Tom Cruise never said a word. The karma line was manufactured by tabloids. He remained silent, locked behind NDAs, behind the private fortress he built after decades of scrutiny. Yet silence can wound too, because silence leaves space for the world to write its own version of your pain. For Nicole, tragedy was no longer a single moment. It had become a pattern: loss, recovery, collapse, resilience. A cycle she never asked for, but somehow carried with a grace that defied gravity. And as Christmas approached, with her daughters asking questions she could barely answer, she made a choice that broke her heart in the gentlest way. She would reunite with Keith for the holidays, not to resurrect a marriage, but to give her girls a memory of warmth in a year filled with cold. There is a truth hidden beneath every headline, every rumor, every whispered theory about Nicole Kidman's life. A truth the world never cared to ask, because it is quieter than scandal and softer than drama. It does not fit neatly into tabloid columns or explosive thumbnails. It lives in the spaces between her breaths, in the moments when no one is watching. The truth is this: Nicole Kidman has spent her entire life learning how to lose without letting it turn her heart to stone. Behind the glamour, there is a woman shaped by absence, the absence of certainty, the absence of the children she raised but could not keep, the absence of a husband whose addictions sometimes swallowed the tenderness she relied on, the absence of a past she cannot rewrite. Even now, as her name circles the globe in stories she did not tell and headlines she did not choose, she remains the same woman who once blinked under harsh schoolyard sunlight, wondering why belonging always felt a step out of reach. And yet the world thinks it knows her. They point to Tom Cruise's silence and call it judgment. They point to Keith Urban's distance and call it betrayal. They watched Nicole walk across a red carpet with flawless poise and decide she must be stronger than human sorrow. But strength and loneliness often share the same face. It is only the heart beneath that distinguishes the two. The hidden truth is that Nicole never sought revenge. Not against Tom, not against Keith, not against the industry that dissected her heartbreak like entertainment. She never wanted power over the men who once defined entire eras of her life. She wanted something far simpler, something heartbreakingly small. She wanted peace. Not the cinematic kind, wrapped in resolution and orchestral closure, but the ordinary kind. The peace of waking up without reading her own pain on global news feeds. The peace of watching her daughters laugh without worrying what storm might come next. The peace of being able to say goodbye to old wounds without the world reminding her that they once bled. And there is another truth, one even softer, even more invisible. Nicole does not want to revisit the past with Tom Cruise. His silence is not a door. It is a wall she learned to stop knocking on. She no longer wonders what he thinks of her choices, of her failures, of her triumphs. She made peace with the fact that his world now moves separately from hers, sealed off by a belief system she could never share. The children they once held together are part of a story she has carried quietly, respectfully, painfully. A story she rarely speaks of, because some griefs lose their honesty when spoken aloud. With Keith, the truth is even more delicate. She does not hate him, she does not resent him. She knows the storms he faces because she has walked through storms of her own. She understands how musicians and men can break under the weight of expectation. She understands how love can remain even after marriage cannot. And she knows that, in the eyes of her daughters, he is not the man who left, he is the father who tries. That alone is enough for her to set aside the wreckage and offer one more fragile gesture of grace, a Christmas together, even if for just a day. But the deepest truth of all, the one the tabloids always miss, is this. Nicole Kidman is not trying to rewrite her past. She is trying to protect her present. She is not chasing old love. She is shielding her children from becoming collateral damage in an adult war. She is not searching for redemption. She is searching for stillness. And in this pursuit, she stands alone, not as a celebrity, not as a former wife of two famous men, not as a Hollywood icon, but as a mother holding two small hearts in a world far too willing to shatter them. That is the truth hidden beneath every rumor. Not karma, not scandal, not reunion, not revenge. Just a woman who has carried too many storms, trying to give her daughters one quiet holiday where the snow falls gently and nothing hurts for a little while. In the quiet after the storm, when the tabloids grow tired and the headlines fade like dying echoes, Nicole Kidman remains exactly where she has always been, somewhere between resilience and tenderness, carrying her life the way one carries a fragile glass lantern through a darkened path. Not proudly, not dramatically, carefully. She has survived the rise and fall of two great loves. She has endured the silence of one man and the distance of another. She has been praised, judged, adored, misunderstood, and through all of it, she never let the world harden her. Her strength was never loud. It lived in her softness, in the way she kept loving even when love demanded more than it gave. This Christmas, she will sit beside her daughters, two bright souls who see her not as a legend, but as the woman whose arms have never failed them. Keith will be near, not as the man he once was to her, but as the father their children still need. And somewhere far away, Tom Cruise will continue his life of guarded privacy, untouched by the noise, a distant star in a constellation that once included her. Their lives have drifted apart, each carrying its own gravity, yet the story they once shared lingers, not as drama, but as a chapter of youth, ambition, and heartbreak that shaped them all in ways the world may never fully understand. And as the year folds into winter, one truth settles gently over everything. Nicole Kidman does not need a perfect ending. She only needs a peaceful one. If her story touched you, let it remind you that even the brightest lives carry shadows, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply choosing to walk forward with grace.